everyone, I'm Ari here with Rachel and we're your hosts for the Merry Writer podcast. This week we're on episode 217 and we're asking, what should you consider when being a beta reader? Before we dive into the topic, don't forget to subscribe to the podcast wherever you're listening if you haven't already, and if you do enjoy the show, please share it with friends and feel free to write a review. Okay, so we're talking beta reading. First, before accepting the role as a beta reader, make sure you ask some important questions. When I first started beta reading for people, I loved the idea of helping new authors polish their manuscripts and being that extra pair of eyes. And also, I like reading and it's always fun to read someone's book before it comes out. It's like very special. However, I did make the mistake of not asking any questions and ended up beta reading some books that I had to either slog through because they were just not for me and I was not interested at all. And nobody wants to hear that. Or they were definitely not aimed at me audience-wise. So I wasn't the best person to give feedback, especially when it's beta reading and not critique partnering. I do find that beta reading often has a critique sense to it more than just reading it as a reader. Because let's be honest, if you're a writer reading someone's work, you can't help but look through the writer glasses. So, but yeah, I've had some bad experiences, and in all honesty, it was my issue because I did not ask questions. So if someone comes to you and asks you to beta read for them, or you see a call out on social media saying, hey, I'm looking for betas, save yourself the hassle and ask some questions first. And these are a few that I would recommend. Firstly, what is the genre? And if possible, see if you can get them to break it down. Don't just have them say, it's a fantasy or it's a sci-fi. Is it high fantasy, epic fantasy, urban fantasy, romantasy? There are so many different pieces, like I'm trying to think of some books. Give me a minute. Lord of the Rings is a fantasy. It's an epic fantasy. But then you've also got The Worst Witch is a fantasy. It's an urban fantasy and it's a younger version. So it's, you're talking like, I don't want to say lower fantasy. It's not lower, but it's not an epic or high fantasy. So there is a difference and it helps to be aware of that. So ask for genre and try and get specifics. Ask what age category it is. So you're talking children's, middle grade, young adult, new adult, adult. If you aren't already familiar with those age ranges and the age range that typically falls within those book categories, I would go and find that out. A lot of adults are happy to read middle grade and YA, so there's no issue with that. But you do need to make sure that they are what you're interested in. I have read books that were marked as new adult, which I actually like, and they turned out to be what I would consider young YA, which was not my thing. And I had to go back and kind of politely decline because it just wasn't something I was going to enjoy, in which case I wasn't going to be able to give the best response to how I felt the characters worked or anything like that. Okay, next question. Who is your target audience? This can be connected to the above question and it can give you a better understanding. They might be able to tell you some comp authors, such as the story would appeal to Sarah J. Maas fans or Stephen King fans. I will give you one hint. If your author that you're speaking to says their target audience is everybody, back away. No book is for everybody. And if they're saying that, they do not know their own audience level, and you're probably going to read a book that's not for you. I'm sorry to say that, but if anyone says it's for everybody, no, it's not. No, it's not. And they need to do a bit more work. Might be unpopular opinion, but I'm going to stick with it. Next is, what is the word count or page count, whichever you prefer? I prefer word count. This question allows you to figure out the sort of time frame. So if someone says, oh yeah, it's 60,000 words, you think, yeah, I know how long that'll take. If they say it's 200,000 words and they need it back in a month, you might be like, not sure I can manage that. So just be aware of that sort of question to ask to give you an idea, and also make sure you think about wiggle room. Very important. Another question, my last one, would be, what is in the story? Now, obviously you could add your own preferences and everything, but if you have specifics that you do and don't like, you might want to make that known. Does the book have violence? Does it have spice? Does it have bad language? If you prefer books without spice or violence, but you're okay with bad language, let the author know. If you don't want to read about death, but you're okay with spice, let the author know. I will say this should not be a giant, long, drawn-out list of all your preferences and avoidances. That's not what this is about. It's just about making sure that you're not going to be giving suggestions on a book, saying things like, well, I didn't like the sex scenes, or, oh my God, there was so much bad language. It's like, it was a war book. It's going to have bad language. There's going to be violence because it's set in a war, things like that. So try and think carefully about what the sort of things you definitely don't want to read about. If you don't want to read about abuse, if you don't want to read about violence or death, ask that question And if they say, yes, that's got that sort of thing, it's got direct imagery, then you can say, it's not really for me. If it's off screen, you might be able to think, well, maybe I'll give it a try. But it just it stops wasting the author's time and it stops wasting your time. Those are my questions I would suggest. There might be more, but those are the ones I definitely ask nowadays.
No, I agree with that, especially with what is in the story, the violence, the bad language. You want to ask how graphic those things are, because then you should already know what your comfort level is and how in depth you can read about those things. So that's certainly important. And that kind of goes hand in hand if there are any trigger warnings for the story. That's something that I didn't always ask when beta reading back in the day. And I quickly learned that I needed to ask that as someone with anxiety and depression. I think in a nutshell, Ari, all the questions that you mentioned, they're very similar to what you would write down on like your book review policy page. If you're also a book reviewer, then these are things that you would list on your policy page before people reach out to you. What genre you're interested in, what target audience you are, what age group you like to read in, and just like typical story elements, themes, tropes that you like or that you don't like, and trigger warnings that are like a hard no for you. So anything that you wouldn't read or review if an author came up to you and said, hey, here's an art copy of my book, could you review it? You probably wouldn't want to beta read it either. So those things, they kind of go hand in hand. You probably already know the answers to a lot of these questions. So for me, when Ari asked the question, what should you consider when being a beta reader? I actually interpreted the question very differently than how Ari did or how Ari meant it. For me, if somebody asks you to be a beta reader, you want to decide on your why. Do you want to be a beta reader because you want to help your fellow writers in the community? Or do you want to brag that you read it first? Do you believe those authors will return the favor when it's time for your book to be beta read? Basically, you just want to be a beta reader for good reasons. For example, many authors swap manuscripts with one another as betas, but don't assume someone will beta read yours just because you read theirs first. Even if you write in the same genre, your books might still not be for them, but that doesn't mean they don't value your opinion and respect you as a writer and a reader. And it goes both ways. The next thing to consider is time, which Ari did touch upon with the word count and the page count. Beta reading is a huge commitment, and you need to be aware of your time as well as the authors. So you want to stick to their deadlines, and if you can't, either don't agree to beta read, or if something comes up, let the author know ASAP that you need an extension, or maybe you can simply give them whatever notes you have thus far. This is actually one of the reasons why I stopped beta reading, was because it got to a point where I was spending so much time reading other people's books that I wasn't writing my own, so I kind of stopped beta reading. And actually, that's probably another thing that I can add. Limit yourself to how many books you can beta read at a time. Ideally, you should probably only work on one at a time. But if you have multiple authors reaching out to you asking, and you can look at your schedule and you have a decent idea of how long it takes you to beta read a book, maybe you could take on like 2 or 3 beta read projects at a time. But keep that in mind as well. Don't overexert yourself, don't burn yourself out, and don't take on too much that you end up giving one book so much attention, and then you beta read for another author and you barely give their book the time of day. You just give it a quick read and that's it. Which kind of brings me to my next point, is reading like a writer versus reading like a reader. And you can ask the author to clarify this. Are you reading their books as a fellow writer, tossing in your 2 cents and basic editing, proofreading thoughts? Or are you reading the story through the eyes of a reader and giving general opinionated thoughts? In most cases, you're probably doing both. But depending on what stage the writer is in with their manuscript, they might want you to look at it as a writer more so than a reader, or they might prefer you to read it like a reader more so than a writer. And finally, you want to think about payment. And this is a bit of a controversial thing. Similar to whether or not book reviewers should be paid, beta readers getting paid is a hot topic. And to be honest, it's one I really don't have an opinion about one way or the other. But I thought I'd bring it up because I have seen writers offer beta reading services through their website, and some are paid, some are free. Everyone should be compensated for their time. But there's also something endearing about writers helping writers, and also just humans doing a favor for another human out of the goodness of their heart. So maybe this answer is a no-brainer for you, but it is still something to consider. because obviously if you want to get paid for beta reading, there's going to be authors out there that won't be able to afford it, or they believe beta readers should do it for free or in exchange for, beta read for beta read. So if you do want to get paid, you're going to turn some authors away. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. But again, it's something to think about.
Good point. And I have points to your points. Always fun. You mentioned about like the manuscript swap. I have seen that a lot. And at first I always thought that's a really cool idea and everything. But I think you also need to be aware that not every writer is on the same level. And I do not mean this in any disrespectful way. If you have only been writing for a very short time compared to someone who's been writing a lot longer, if someone has been published and worked with editors and everything, they will have a different level to someone who has never worked with editors and things like that. And sometimes while it can still be useful swapping manuscripts, it doesn't automatically mean that everyone is always going to want to do a swap, because if levels aren't the same or similar, it might not bring as much as they need. I know that sounds uncomfortable, and as I'm saying it, I'm like, oh, I hope I don't get hate for this. But that's just part of it. And I think you need to go in aware that that might be a thought or a request. So if someone says, oh, let's swap manuscripts, it doesn't have to be something you have to do. It might be something afterwards you think, that's not really what I want to do. Or it might be something you've never wanted to do, in which case you can just sort of let them know straight away. But I certainly wouldn't ask someone to beta read my manuscript and they then come back and say, oh, I'd love you to beta read mine, and I'd be like, yeah, sure, and then think, I don't really want to do that. You should always be open and upfront. If you don't think you'll have the time, if you don't think you'll have the ability, if you don't think it's something that you would enjoy, then be clear quite early on. You don't want someone giving you their time assuming that you're going to give them your time, and then you just pull that rug right out, which can happen.
I agree with you on that. And I think that if you want to manuscript swap with someone or a group of people, that's when you would join a writer's group. You wouldn't do a beta read for that. A beta reader it's kind of like with social media, like a follow for follow. That's not really how beta reading works. Or at least I don't agree that's how beta reading should work. But yeah, if you want to do like a manuscript swapped, look for a online writing critique group or a local writing critique group or something like that.
Definitely. And get those questions answered about what sort of style and writing and page number is early. So you're not agreeing to something saying, yeah, this person looks great, and then finding out, wow, they have this epic, and you gave them a 40,000 word novella and they've given you a 200,000 word epic, and it's like, I don't think I can do that. Just a thought. Regarding the time commitment, I think some people go into beta reading not realizing that it's not just reading. It's like, you might go, well, I can read like 3 books a month or 5 books a month or 8 books a month. It's like, yeah, but it's not reading. This is not sitting there with a book on your knee while you're in bed or with a cup of tea or anything. You are reading, analyzing, and making notes and comments. You're going back and going, did I read that right? So it does take a lot more time. So however long it takes you to read, you need to like double that just to give yourself wiggle room in case something comes up. You might get sick. You might get stuck with something. All sorts of things. So yeah, it is a time commitment, and it's more of a time commitment than you're used to if you've never done beta reading before. So if you're going to do it, start small and make sure there's a big enough deadline to give you that option.
I want to add on to that real quick, because it is true. You're not sitting there just reading in bed with a cup of coffee, not tea. You can, oh shit. I got so hung up on the beverage. I forgot what I was going to say.
That's what coffee does to your memory.
No, I almost agreed with you for a second. But no. What I was going to say is that if you're beta reading for someone and you fall in love with their manuscript and it's so good, it can be easy to kind of slip into reader mode and you kind of forget that you're beta reading. So you do just sit there and read, but then you need to remember that you have to go back and reread and actually make notes and write what you liked and anything that you didn't like. And if you find any typos or whatever, you still have to add constructive criticism. Even if it is positive, you still have to add something. You can't just read through the manuscript, hand it back to the author and say, no notes, perfect, loved it. It doesn't work like that. So you got to be prepared for that as well. Like that's something else that you need to add to your time. If you get sucked into, wow, this is a really good story, and then you forget to take notes, because that has happened to me before. And then you got to go back and reread it, and which obviously takes up more time.
It is a good compliment on the writing, though, when someone said like, "Oh, I got caught up, I had to go back," because it's like, well, that's a good sign. That's a good sign.
Yes,
I am going to just touch on the payment thing. That is controversial. I have to say, especially if we're talking authors who are going to be self-published, the fact that you're going to be paying for an editor, a professional, let's make sure, professional editor, I would not be interested in throwing money at a beta reader. I am sorry to say. It's like I'm already going to be paying an editor. I don't see the point in paying a beta reader. I understand why people would do it, and there is that sense of, people deserve to be compensated, but at the same time, it's like you don't have to do that. You don't have to be a beta reader. So I appreciate that people will probably, there will be people who will pay. But if you're going into it hoping to do beta reading to make a lot of money, I think you'll be surprised that a lot of authors will probably not want to do that, mainly because we're saving our pennies for our editors. Just the way it is.
Right. And it's similar to whether or not you should pay a book reviewer to review your book. That's another sticky topic. And yeah, I feel like it should be one of those things where writers should just do other writers a favor without swapping manuscripts, like without expecting something in return.
Well, the paying book reviewers is weird to me because you're paid in the book. It's like if you're reviewing a product, a company will send you the product for free often, or give you a license for a year or something of software, and then you use it and you gain that option for free, and then you review it. That's what the book is. The book, you got the book, which you would have had to have paid X amount of money for to review it. So that seems weird to me. And also, if you're paying someone, I would always be sat there going, did they leave me a nice review because they felt they had to because I paid them? And surely if they left me a crappy review, wouldn't I be like, I'm not using them again? So wouldn't there be the concept of them leaving a positive review because they would probably hope that the next book would go to them and the next book, and they're keeping me happy? Because you can't get away from the concept that that is something people would do. They're not going to crap all over your book when you've got a series coming out, because the first thing you think is, I'm not going to give the rest of it to that person. I don't want to get another shitty review. So, I mean, it's another one of those things. Like, psychologically, would that really work? Or would you always be sat there going, did you just leave me a nice review because you want my business the next time I bring a book out? So that's just a thought. Just a thought. Okay, let's wrap this up. Last quick thing. If you decide to go ahead and be a beta reader, the next step is to make sure that you and the author are on the same page. Like the pun, like the pun. I noticed, I was expecting a reaction. I got nothing, so I had to point it out.
I didn't get it until you pointed it out. I'm over here playing with my hair.
Seriously, no focus. So be clear on what they want from you. Ask if they have questions. A lot of authors will actually give you a list of questions. They'll ask about pacing. They'll ask about character development. They might ask about certain scenes that they're not sure about. Ask, do they want you to catch spelling errors? Do they want you to catch grammatical errors? Do they want you to catch world building issues? Are they just looking for pacing? Are they just looking for plot continuity? Find out, because you don't want to just go into it, do a lot of work, and find out actually they didn't care about half of that stuff. They just wanted to know about the pacing. Look at method. What is the method they use? Some authors might send you blocks of chapters, so you might get 5 or 10 chapters at a time. Others, they might want to send you the whole manuscript. They might want to send it in Google Docs. They might want to send it in Word with comments enabled. They might want to send it as a whole document, and then they just want your overall thoughts in an email. All authors are different. Don't assume that just because you've beta read for someone and they sent you a Word document with comments that the next person's going to do that. So be aware of that. Don't forget, do not accept more than you can do. And don't feel pressured to do more than you can do. I'm going to say something, and I'm hopefully not going to offend anyone, but some authors can be a little thoughtless and over-expectant with people. In the past, I did do a beta reading for a new author. I didn't even know them that well. They just reached out to me, and I was in my people-pleasing phase. And I did it, and I sent all the details, and then they sent me several chapters of the next book that I had not agreed to. And it was like the assumption I would just carry on as if I had all the time in the world to dedicate to their book when I hadn't agreed. So I had to kind of gently push back. And I've had that with others where they asked if I could look at a few of the chapters, especially early chapters. You know, we all hate the early chapters because you've got to catch the reader quickly. And then next minute, they're sending me the whole book. And again, hadn't agreed, so have to push back. And there's been a few of these people where they just never spoke to me again, because apparently I offended them by pushing back and setting the boundary that was already there. So do not feel pressured. As Rachel said, you can get sort of like spiraled in to reading and reviewing and beta reading other people's novels to the point where you're not writing anything. It's so easy because we want to help. We want to help people, we want to do nice things for other people. But some people will take advantage and feel that they're entitled to your time, and they're not. So set those boundaries and stick to them. And one quick final thought: if it's a series, be aware that if you don't want to read all of the series, let the author know early, because they may want betas who can stick with the whole series. Otherwise, you will end up with the whole series. Just a thought.
Alternatively, if they want you to beta read book 3 and you haven't read books 1 and 2, ask for a review copy of books 1 and 2. Because you don't want to throw in your time and money on something that you might not even really like. Just again, like when you're beta reading, you're doing the writer a favor, not your full-time job. Unless you are asking for payment, who knows? Maybe there are people out there who are making full-time incomes on beta reading. I don't know. I also wanted to agree, like, Ari, you mentioned something that I forgot to mention earlier about be clear on what they want from you. If somebody asks you to beta read, I used to email them back and say, give me a checklist of things you want me to think about when reading your story, whether it's like grammar and spelling, whether it's character development for all, or for like this one specific character that you feel wonky with, I don't know, and be specific too. And when you send that, when you ask for that checklist, set your boundaries and say, this is what I am agreeing to. I am going to read chapters 1 through 3 by this day. That's it. If I want more, I will ask. Or if you need me to do more, ask me and I'll let you know if I can or can't. Or I'm agreeing to just this one book. I'm agreeing to the whole series. Like you got to be clear. The whole thing with beta reading, you need to have an honest and transparent relationship with the person you're beta reading for.
That is perfect. It is a relationship and it needs to be clear. I'm going to end it with that because Rachel said it perfectly. So with that, we're going to turn it over to you guys. Are you a beta reader or have you worked with them before? What are some other things that beta readers should consider? Let us know your answers in the comments so we can have a quick chat about it. Remember, we release new episodes every Wednesday. Next week, we're discussing self-editing tips. To ensure you don't miss it, hit the subscribe button on your way out. And as always, thanks for listening to the Merry Writer Podcast. We'll see you next week. This podcast is brought to you by Shiny Objects. We're easily distracted. The music titled Inspired is by Kevin MacLeod, licensed under Creative Commons 4.0.